Hey guys, it's History Behind the Warrior, and welcome back to yet another God of War video. Today, after our in-depth exploration of both the worlds of Greek and Norse mythology, I thought that finally, we could turn our gaze to the other worlds and pantheons that we do know exist in the God of War universe. By doing so, we can learn about the gods that inhabit them, as well as give us a rough idea of how exactly do these pantheons function, and finally, how could Kratos and Atreus fit into these worlds, as we do know that the Norse series of games revolves around the idea of Ragnarok. So Atreus is the centerpiece of these events, but with them in a new world, how could this all work? Well, that's going to be what we're going to explore today. But in order for us to really do this, and understand how this is possible, is by us quickly turning our attention to one of the most important plot devices in all of God of War, Tyr's mural. This mural you can see right now really does open up the world of the universe, giving us different gateways and avenues to explore much bigger worlds. And as we take a look at the insignias, we see it hinting at an Egyptian pantheon, a Japanese pantheon, as well as a Mayan pantheon. So today, seeing as I have already touched on the Egyptian pantheon, please do give that video a watch by the way, I will be turning my sights towards the Japanese pantheon and breaking down how exactly is it unique to the God of War universe, and of course, how many similarities does it share with the previous existing pantheons. But before we do begin, as always guys, I would super appreciate it if we could first get this video to about 500 likes. It's not only a great way of supporting this video, but this channel out as a whole, as we do hopefully get closer and closer to the reveal date of God of War Ragnarok. So with that now out of the way, let's get on with the video, shall we? Now, for this video, I will mostly be deriving a lot of my information from the text of Kojiki, the oldest book that chronicles these myths and characters. And from what we do know and understand from these texts, is that the Japanese pantheon of gods are just as unique and different as the Olympian and Aesir gods, with them being more commonly referred to as the Shinto Pantheon, with they themselves, of course, being comprised of their own big three, that being Amaterasu, Tsukuyomi, and Susanoo. While in the West, we may refer to them as gods. In the East, they are typically referred to as kamis. Now, the Shinto Pantheon is comprised of many different and unique deities, each embodying a different aspect of Japan's culture and lifestyle. So there will be a god that symbolizes a certain element, maybe a particular part of their culture, or maybe an aspect of the cosmos. And this would not have been possible for many of them without the influence of Izanagi and Izanami, primordial gods that are roughly the equivalents to that of the Titans or Ymir, if you need a comparison to understand how they are perceived. So, with that being said, since I've mentioned them, let's now go to the dawn of time and talk about how the Shinto Pantheon came to be. At the dawn of their world, there was simply the abyss, an empty world filled with the chaos of the universe. But in due time, the first age of primordial gods would arise, being known as the Hitorigami. This was made up of 5 ancient deities, with 3 of them going on to procreate and give birth to the next 7 generation of gods, and the final 2 would be Izanami and Izanagi. So whilst these 2 are the most infamous of their generation, they were not the first gods. But what made them stand out from their ancestors? Well, it's largely due to their offspring and the difficulties the 2 underwent when they were married to each other, as their first child was born without limbs nor feet. After consulting with the gods, they were finally able to conceive many children, including those that would later become the 8 great islands of Japan. The 2 were able to sire many children, but one day they were struck with a great tragedy, as Izanami would give birth to the fire god of destruction, Katsukichi. The fire god would see her womb killing her upon his birth. And Izanagi, in his rage-filled grief, would strike down the child. With his beloved gone, Izanagi would travel to Yomi, the land of the dead, and the Shinto Pantheon equivalent of basically the underworld or hell. Here, Izanagi would wander aimlessly, searching for his love. And in time, he did find her. But as she sought permission to leave, when Izanagi lit a flame from his hair and gazed upon his love, he was horrified with what he had seen, as Izanami was now a decayed and maggot-filled corpse. A far cry from the woman he had fallen in love with. So out of fear and shock, he would abandon his quest, returning back to the land of the living, whilst Izanami would be left bitter as she promised to have him pay for abandoning her, swearing to flood the land of the living with the dead she would conjure. Once Izanagi returned home, he would begin to cleanse his soul, and upon washing his face, he would give birth to 3 different gods. Amaterasu, the goddess of the sun and the heavens, Tsukuyomi, the god of the moon, and Susanoo, the god of the seas and storm. This is where the Shinto Pantheon is born, as once it is formed, Izanagi passes over his role as creation god to Amaterasu, choosing to travel back to the world of Yomi and block the world of the dead with a giant boulder in order to stop the mad Izanami, knowing that if he were not to do so, then the world may be engulfed in an endless slaughter. So the heavens would now be left in the care of his children. But things weren't as simple as it seemed, as the gods were individuals in themselves, and thus did not always see eye to eye, as there was a long-standing, somewhat rivalry between Amaterasu and Susanoo. Whilst Amaterasu embodied the stereotypical divine and noble aspects of godhood, Susanoo was one that embodied chaos, and because of this, was exiled for a very long time, and this understandably left him quite bitter. So to somewhat show his worth, he would challenge his sister to a contest of creation, believing that by winning, he could maybe regain entry to the heavens. But in his loss, Susanoo found only anger and sorrow. So to extract revenge, Susanoo would tarnish her crops, kill her steed, and even one of her handmaidens. And this upset Amaterasu so much that in her grief, she would descend from the heavens and hide deep within a cave. Without the sun goddess, the world would be engulfed in darkness. In time, she would later return, but it took a lot of convincing. Now, her disappearance in Japanese mythology is really there to symbolize the change of weather in Japan. Now, Susanoo would be punished for his actions, and as penance, would be tasked by his father to guard the gates of Yomi, somewhat redeeming himself at the end of his journey. Now, whilst we have talked a fair bit about Amaterasu and Susanoo, let's touch on Tsukuyomi and what makes him unique to the Shinto Pantheon, because by many, he is actually seen as an evil god. Because at one point in time, when he was married to Amaterasu, he would murder a fellow god out of disgust and rage. The death of the goddess reached the ears of many in the Pantheon, and once Amaterasu learned of his crimes, the two would separate, and Tsukuyomi, an individual that represents the moon, would forever be chasing his wife across the night sky, forever gazing upon her, but never in reach of her forgiveness. Now, these weren't strictly the only gods of the Pantheon, as it was comprised of many different and unique individuals, and this includes two that many might actually be quite familiar with on this channel: Raijin and Fujin, the god of storms and the god of wind. They were a formidable duo together, being widely regarded by many as the strongest of the elemental gods. But despite their mantles, they were not really seen as divine beings, but more so akin to that of demons, as the two were born from the decaying corpse of Izanagi, hence why their appearance are far more akin to that of Oni than that of a divine god. They are beings sent from the land of the dead to enforce their mother's will of bringing death and destruction, and thus so, could be seen as villainous. Now, our next and final god is of course going to be Japan's own god of war, Hachiman. He was seen as a divine protector of Japan, and one that guarded its land from invaders. His distinct appearance and warrior spirit helped craft him into legend amongst the samurai, as many wished to reach his greatness and live out his brave teachings. This god of war in particular is more of a figurehead than an actual deity, thus his background is largely shrouded in mystery. So, from what you can tell, the Shinto Pantheon of gods is vast and filled with very unique deities. And what also makes it quite unique here is that the Shinto Pantheon doesn't actually suffer from any apocalyptic events like Ragnarok. It all seems to be interconnected personal wars, such as the battle between Izanami and Izanagi. The world of Japanese mythology is filled with both wonderful and uniquely terrifying creatures. Ranging from Shinigamis to Onis to Kappas, there's a certain element of beauty in the supernatural horror that these creatures do present. But now, how does Kratos and Atreus fit into this world? Well, that's the interesting part. They kinda don't. Due to the open-ended nature of this mythology, you could really insert them in at any point in time here. But seeing as we are exploring this pantheon, allow me to theorycraft a scenario that very well could happen. Let's just say Kratos and Atreus were to end up in Japan. For whatever reason, it doesn't really matter how they got there. If I were to set them a point in time, it would be during Amaterasu's self-incarceration. With her disappearance, Japan is not only stripped of this goddess, but the sun is also taken away too, meaning that it would be engulfed by the darkness, storms, and hurricanes. So the world of man would be left abandoned, and even the heavens themselves would be left somewhat leaderless. With Susanoo exiled, the only god that could replace her is Tsukiyomi, a god that I have also pointed out isn't exactly seen in the greatest light. And if we were to write in his divorce with the character, then he could very well be a bitter individual that has lost his way. Now back to the forgotten world of man, you could have Japan be terrorized by the likes of Izanami's children, as they may be seeking to wage a war against the gods on behalf of their mother, with maybe even Raijin and Fujin leading the charge. So the landscape of Japan could be terrorized by the beasts of the underworld, with Izanagi maybe having failed in his quest to halt Izanami's assault. So you kind of create this interesting scenario where Atreus and Kratos are caught in this battle between gods and monsters. You could have them ultimately go on a quest to seek out Amaterasu and maybe restore the world of Japan. It may stop the attack of Izanami and allow her to be sealed away once more, as it is Susanoo's fate to take over his father's god. Let's not forget that these gods aren't just black and white. They exist in a morally grey area that is something the newer God of War games has been adopting. So I feel like this idea kind of plays into that narrative quite well. And along with that, we get something that's a bit different from what we've seen, as the Greek series of games was a tale of vengeance, where one man waged a war against Olympus. In the Norse series of games, it is one that revolves around the prophecy of the end days known as Ragnarok. And a game like this could very well focus on what happens when the two are cast into an unknown world, where the gods are literally fighting hell itself. I personally think it makes for an interesting premise, and could also help solidify the relationship between Kratos and Atreus, seeing as so much of the feud itself is family oriented. But hey, this is all simply a bit of a spitball idea on my end. What do you think of exploring the Shinto Pantheon? Personally, I love the idea of exploring the world of Japan. You could combine elements from the Shogun feudal era with the bleak horrors of the supernatural. There's a lot of visually beautiful elements that could really be used to make this world feel alive and unique in the God of War universe. There really is an endless source of interesting gods and monsters to battle. The Shinto Pantheon sounds like an incredible one to explore, and with its open gaps narratively, it allows for a lot of freedom when it comes to making a living and breathing world. So if we are going to explore another pantheon, I really hope Japan is on that list. But for now, this has been it for me. I hope you have all enjoyed this one, as this was a lot of fun to explore. I'm actually very unfamiliar with this pantheon of gods, and shamelessly, I'm only kind of familiar with them from Naruto. So this was a super fun opportunity to break down that barrier and actually understand and learn the meaning behind those names and the world they come from. So on that note, guys, as always, stay strong, stay well, and keep on fighting as Ragnarok comes for us all. Take care, everyone. I'll see you soon.